So I was curious about whether you guys did it over only IPv4 or was IPv6 also included?
So we only did IPv4. Census
Mm-hmm.
doesn't support IPv6, and the
Mm-hmm.
IPv6 support on Shodan is very limited.
Mm-hmm.
So IPv6 scanning in itself has a lot of issues right now. So the
Yeah.
IPv4 space can be trivially enumerated, whereas the
Mm-hmm.
IPv6 space can't.
Yeah. So this was only based on IPv4.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I wonder if you could say something about how you think we should understand your findings at a higher level. So if we want to answer certain type of questions, we should prefer one system versus the other, or what we should as researchers take away from how should your work inform future research in the area?
So the main points we were looking at was Shodan and Census are both very popular tools chosen by researchers in the field. So you see a lot of papers where people will cite Census and Shodan as a typical example would be we have found some vulnerability in SSH, say, and they'll go on and say we use Census and we found 43 million devices that are vulnerable to our new attack. So there's a lot of research right now that is based on is Shodan and Census accurate? So the direction I was going in with my work was to start moving in that direction. This work here, we decided to drill down to one very specific measurement. So a lot of the work we were based off of looked at when a device first comes onto the internet, how long does it take for Shodan and Census to find that device? So what I extended that to was now that Shodan and Census have found these devices, when they update, how long does it take to get updated? So our work found that it was about 90% of our tokens were not recovered. The ones that were very, very quick to update. It was always within 24 hours for every token that was updated. That's where we got our conclusion that they could benefit from faster banner grabbing if they wanted to have a more up-to-date view of the internet. It's not sure if that's completely practical because there's so many services and the internet's so vast that can take a lot of time and resources to do.
I see we have a question in Slack. Roberto, would you like to ask in the Zoom?
Yeah, sorry, I'm muting myself. Okay. Yeah, so the question is, do you know if Census and Shodan they even attempt to scan IPv6 addresses? I mean, there are ways, right, that you can find at least a subspace to scan. So I was wondering, yeah, do you have any experience with that?
So as of December, when I stopped looking into this, Census does not do any IPv6 scanning, but Shodan does. I know there's a whole RFC written on techniques to enumerate IPv6 or to guess if there's a word hidden in the IPv6 address. It reduces the search space, and it gives you a higher chance of finding IPv6 devices. But if you're trying to invite them to scan your virtual machine, if you're connected with IPv4, you don't even have to invite them. They'll just find you because they'll enumerate the entire IPv4 address space. So if you're running any standard service, HTTP, SSH, FTP, there's many that they support. You can look at their sites for the full list. You will eventually get found and enumerated by them. There are ways where you can invite them. So some of the services they offer where they will routinely scan your system. So if you had a company network and you wanted to conduct an external vulnerability scan for whatever services your company is facing outwards towards the internet, they provide services like that.
All right, thank you.
And Gallo, I see you have a question in Zoom or in Slack. Or if you prefer, I can repeat it for you.
I'm just reading it really quick, sorry.
Folks who are on the Slack, the question is, do you notice any other scans other than Shodan or Census? If so, how did these compare with the ones by Shodan and Census?
So we filtered all of our traffic so that we only saw Census and Shodan in our data set. So we of course got so much more data. We had many times more data from non-Census and Shodan sources. We made no attempt to identify any of them. We just filtered on Census and Shodan.
Gotcha. Ali, would you like to ask, or are you able to ask your question in the Zoom?
Yeah, sure. Just to follow up on Peter's previous question, with your findings, were you able to identify previous works that used Census and Shodan, where their results would be affected by what you found?
So the majority of the work was doing a 1 or 2 time scan event that we were looking into. So in those cases, they wouldn't be. This would be more if you needed very up-to-date and frequent snapshots of the internet. So if you had some sort of work involving a few days would make the difference in your results. That's the kind of work that this would affect.
Okay, thanks.
And one last question from Ben Stock, if you're able to answer, if you're able to lead on the Zoom.
Yeah, it's not it's less of a question, more of a comment. Sorry. I was just half listening, getting my kids back to bed. But as far as I understood, you essentially do use the reverse DNS or the for star.shodan IO to identify scanners, right?
Yeah.
And some of my colleagues a couple of years ago did some identification of services that are used in reflective DDoS. So they wanted to identify the scanners. And essentially what they did is when getting scanned, they would return, based on the ingress IP address, they would either return something or not. And so if you see that somebody's using a certain set of IPs to do an attack, you can essentially infer which was the original scanner. And building off of that idea, I was just wondering if it might make sense to, based on the ingress IP, just give back a different token. Because then if you can find a token later on in Shodan, then you know that even though the IP wasn't matching what you're expecting to come from Shodan, you'd still be able to identify them because, well, it showed up in Shodan, right?
I see. You serve them a different resource because you said, there's a Shodan IP address. So now
but the thing is, you don't know. You don't know whether it's a Shodan IP address or not, right? You just
right. It's what we labeled them as Shodan IP addresses based on that, and then. So one of the things we looked at was the tokens that we had. There was no token that appeared in Shodan that was not grabbed by one of the Shodan IP addresses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing we did do, but we could in future work add on to that with what you were suggesting, where when it's Shodan, give them a separate special Shodan only response, and when it's census, give them a special census only response. And then we could say you would effectively have 3 keys per day: a census key, a Shodan key, and a not census and not Shodan key. And that way we could compare, does that not census and Shodan key ever appear in either of them? Then you would know that they were scanning from outside of those IP addresses. That's an interesting question.
Again, less of a question, more
or comment. Sorry, interesting comment. Yeah, I'm curious what would happen now.
I'm not known to ask questions. Just give. All right, thank you very much.
That's probably a good place to pause it then until the panel discussion at the end. But thank you again very much for the.
Thank you.